Assalamualaikum, selamat pagi Puan Haja.
Assalamualaikum, selamat pagi.
Assalamualaikum.
Khabar semua.
Okay, so kita mulakan ya. Yang berbahagia Puan Haja Rotina Muhammad Daik, Ketua Pengarah, the DG of the National Landscape Department Malaysia, fellow speakers, Datuk-Datuk, Datin-Datin, participants and all participants at the Malaysian Botanic Garden Webinar 2021 Series 3 with the topic Ex situ conservation and management. So I would like to welcome everyone, every participants to this event. Thank you for taking your time for being here. And as by the way, if I can introduce myself, my name is Aldri, Dr. Aldri from University Kebangsaan Malaysia. I'm the head of Environmental, Economic and Social Sustainability Research Centre at Lestari UKM. I'm truly honoured, actually. I would like to thank, to send my gratitude to Puan Haja Rotina and the team at Jabatan Landscape Negara, National Landscape Department, for having me as to moderate this event today. It is truly an honour. And even more is to be on the same platform with all 6 prominent speakers on this particular topic. And as we all know, Malaysia, Australia and other 15 mega biodiverse countries in the world, as well as other countries throughout the tropics, we are blessed with high amount of biodiversity in the form of genetic, species, habitats and ecosystems. So it is our responsibility, it is our role to try best to work hard to maintain, to sustain the biodiversity that we have, not only for our country but for the rest of the world. It has high benefit. It plays important roles for global ecosystem. But then, as we all know, all countries are headed towards being a developed country at the expense of the environment. So we started losing our biodiversity, our resources. Hence, ex situ conservation are being being in place in many countries. So the reason of having this webinar, as I've guided by the organizer, it is the purpose is to get to know people around Malaysia and around the world in the Botanic Garden community. So we get connected, we learn from each other. Speakers will share their knowledge, their experience in managing resources out of their home or habitat, or original habitat, and what are the best ways to tackle this issue. So we have awesome speakers today, but before we go to all our speakers, we would like to actually hear from the DG, Puan Haja Rotina, on the mission or vision or the expectation from this webinar, as well as the wide objective of the National Landscape Department. Let's hear from Puan Haja Rotina. Right after Puan Haja Rotina's speech, we will have a group photo session. Is that okay with you, Puan Haja?
Okay, Doctor. Thank you very much.
All right. So the floor is yours then. A big hand for Puan Haja.
Okay. Assalamualaikum and very good morning. Thank you, Dr. Adri, for accepting our invitation to become a moderator for our webinar today. As we all know, this is our 3rd webinar series on Malaysia Botanic Garden webinar 2021, organized by National Landscape Department, Ministry of Housing and Local Government. On behalf of the organizing committee and also from the ministry, I would like to express my gratitude for your participation and presence in our webinar today. And I would also like to express my sincere thanks to all the speakers who, namely Mr. Dale Avison, curator of Brisbane Botanic Garden, Professor Dr. Iskandar Siligar, Director of National Program, IPB, Bogor University, Indonesia, Dr. Samsul Khamis from University Kebangsaan Malaysia, Dr. Nurida Samsul Rizal from University Technology Mara, Malaysia, Mr. Jain Litton from Sabah Agriculture Park Malaysia, Dr. And also our practicing landscape architect, Mr. Oling Manjoy. I would really be honored that everybody would accept our invitation and will share your experience and knowledge in managing the botanic garden and plant cultivation. Ladies and gentlemen, as a landscape department, actually we are honored to have this webinar. First and foremost, we aim to create and strengthen the networking of all botanic gardens and arboreta in the country. The concept of having a good networking is something that has and will continue to prove very important to botanic garden community, and I think the benefit is endless. Secondly, our aim is also to establish a botanic garden that is recognized internationally and locally. And it also, we want to have a botanic garden that follows an international protocol. I also would like to express here that in the previous webinar, we focus more on the design and development concept of botanic gardens, which we brought a prominent landscape architect that have been responsible to design and develop botanic garden of Putrajaya and also a Perak botanic garden. This is a Malaysian botanic garden. And for today's session, the theme is ex situ conservation and management. Through this theme, we hope that we can learn about the success actions and also steps that have been taken, and most importantly, lessons learned from the ex situ conservation and management from the speakers based on your vast experience and also knowledge. The ex situ or off-site conservation means that conservations of components of biological diversity outside its natural habitat. The main objective of ex situ technique is to support the conservations by ensuring the survival of the threatened species and the maintenance of the associated genetic diversity. Developments of botanic gardens is among the ex situ conservation strategy based on I think besides the geological gardens, conservation stand and genes, pollen, seeds, and seedling, tissue culture, and DNA bank. Ex situ conservation make it easier for the scientists to assess, study, distribute, and also use the plant genetics resources. Arboreta or at our local setup, we have it in Forest Research Institute of Malaysia, FRAME, and Taman Rimba Ilmu of University Malaya, Orchid Garden of Tenum Perak Park in Sabah, and also Taman Botanic Perak are a few successful examples of ex situ collection centers in Malaysia. Therefore, it is our hope that this department, National Landscape Department, is very positive towards making a botanic garden as another place for ex situ conservation, especially for the endangered species, threatened, and also for the indigenous species. We would like also, we understand that it is not easy, it's not an easy task to manage and maintain botanic garden. Trees and shrubs are a living organism and biological asset which require maintenance to grow and live healthily. Managing botanic garden requires a specialized personnel, a well-planned and strategic management system. As plant collections are the very essence of the botanic garden, then it should be based on a thorough collection policy. And the collection policy is a vital and strategic document which is very important for a botanic garden. I think this is what we want to learn for our for the experience from other successful botanic gardens in Australia and also in Indonesia, how this activity or this actions has been taken that make your botanic garden very successful. Without a good collection policy or a standards of protocol, it can the collections that we make can stray from our intended intention and purpose. Ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about managing a botanic garden, it is not only about landscape maintenance or management. It requires a comprehensive management plan, which includes science and research, collections and knowledge management, education, appreciation, tourism, recreation, and also a business management plan. The management plan will set up the direction for the future of Botanic Gardens, and it guides its management for the next 50 years or more. It is high time for the management of Botanic Gardens to be the model of environmental sustainability. Climate change, loss of habitats, and biodiversity are a symptoms of human unsustainable use of our natural resources. Having said that, botanic gardens have a strong role to play in promoting environmental sustainability through a comprehensive management practice and by engaging and inspiring the visitors, the citizens of that particular cities or town to understand the critical role that the plants play in supporting our life on our planet. Environmental sustainability has economic, moral, legal, and social benefit from the botanic garden. That is our hope, and that is our intention, that when we develop a botanic garden, it can serve purpose to the community. However, the botanic garden itself, we have to make sure how can this botanic garden deliver the environmental sustainability. An environmental management system, for instance, is a framework that can help a botanic garden to achieve its environmental goal through consistent control of its operation. Apart from that, there are a wide range of environmental standards and schemes that botanic gardens can follow, beside the presence protocol that is we should follow to develop a botanic garden. And ladies and gentlemen, the loss of plant diversity is the most urgent and important issues that the botanic garden needs to address. And at the same time, botanic gardens have a multiple role that are expected to be fulfilled. Botanic gardens, as a professional community, possess a unique knowledge and skill to identify, conserve, and manage plant diversity in the landscape. And for that reason, botanic gardens need to show a great leadership in plants conservation. However, botanic gardens need to organize itself in a rational and cost-effective way by sharing knowledge and enabling all botanic gardens to carry out effective plant conservation in their geographic and taxonomy sphere. From that context, botanic gardens in the country need to create and strengthen a local Malaysian Botanic Garden network in order for us to be a part of the Southeast Asia Botanic Garden, or maybe or at a global level networking as an initial entity. So we should have the same visions and missions. From the National Landscape Department perspective, Botanic Garden in this country should become a legendary project for Malaysia plant collections and conservation for future generation. With that note, I wish all of the participants and also the learned presenters, we can have a fruitful webinar. And with that, I end my speech with wabillahi taufiq wa hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Thank you.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you very much, Puan Hajar Rutina, for the awesome, very comprehensive speech. and it's very clear now the objective of this webinar, as well as the big mission of National Landscape Department in contributing to the conservation of our biodiversity. Particularly planned in this for this session today, I realized we will be focusing on particular and iconic species in Malaysia. We will also be looking at medicinal plants, yeah, the role to the communities. We will be also looking and learning from our friends from Australia, from Indonesia, and the rest of Malaysia on the best way. We will also be touching about technology, yeah, using educational system, new technology, emerging technology to help in assisting. As correctly pointed out by the Puan Haja just now also, genetic specimens, for example, we have germplasm, we have parks, we have herbarium, we have zoos, we have parks, botanical gardens throughout Malaysia. But are we doing the right things? Yeah? Are we doing it in a correct manner, accepted manner? So these will be some of the G's of the discussion today. So thank you very much, Puan Haja. So before we kick off with our first speakers, let's have a group photo to capture this moment right after Puan Haja's speech. So if you can, all of you can turn on your video for just 30 seconds. For a group photo. So Secretariat, if you can be ready with the best cameraman or best screen capturer.
Okay. Yang mana ada apa nama video atau webcam, mohon on kan. Okay, sebentar ya. Saya sedang menyusun ini gambar. Sebentar. Mohon para peserta yang ada webcam tolong on kan.
It's good to see so many familiar faces. Thank you very much for participating and attending. By the way, it's a full day event, so hopefully all of you are ready with your breakfast, your lunch, your evening tea within reach. Yeah. So hopefully, perhaps if things, if this pandemic settles, one day we will have a physical gathering, Puan Haja, so we can claim our breakfast, our lunch, and evening tea.
Orang dah 12 sana.
I hope the pandemic will get over soon.
Yeah, correct.
Saya sedang menyusul gambar. Saya sedang letak yang ada webcam di depan. Sebentar. Puan Fazli Zainal. Sebentar. Saya sedang mencari siapa tu sedang on webcam. Oh, ada ramai di belakang punya. Sebentar ya.
Okay, we are having a photo session. Just wait for a while.
Saya sedang menyusun semua peserta. Sebentar.
Terima kasih semua yang hadir.
Consultant, DL Consultant, siapa lagi? Puan Nurul Ashikin, sebentar.
Jadi bagi saya 1 minit 1 minit.
Okay, 1 minute okay.
Cik Muhammad Nazrin, sebentar. Cik Saiful Nizam. Cik Asmadi. Siapa lagi? Okey. Saya cukup dah full screen lah. Sebentar ya, admit lagi. Okey, masuk. Okey, ready ya, saya nak capture screen.
Dr. Samsul hilang, dia nampak dia punya
background saja.
Oh,
mana dia? Dia menyorok ni.
Dr. Samsul.
Dia nampak
Background saja.
mana dia?
Terus, okay.
Okay.
Okay, ready saya akan print snapshot. Ready, 1, 2, Allah, saya buka mas, sorry. Okay, ready, 1, 2, sebentar. Ready, 1, 2, Allah, saya buka mas, sorry. Ready, 1, 2, sebentar. Okay, satu lagi. Ready, 1, 2. Okay, satu lagi. Okay, selesai.
Okay, terima kasih. Thank you everybody. I'll be joining you for the whole day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, organizer Cik Fakri. Again, thank you very much, Puan Najarutina, for the opening speech, and thank you to all participants for attending and staying. So, as correctly pointed out by Puan Najah earlier in her speech, it is the ultimate aim of having botanic gardens, of having herbarium, of having germplasms, is to protect some of the key iconic species that we are losing. But then the best of all, of course, the most prudent way is to protect the habitats and ecosystem in itself, because what we intend to do is to maintain or sustain biodiversity and the physical biophysical processes that provided by all of these habitats and ecosystems. But then to kick off our forum and webinar today, we would like to hear from my good friend, Dr. Shamsul. Dr. Shamsul Khamis is a senior lecturer at University Kebangsaan Malaysia, Faculty of Science and Technology. He will be speaking about Rafflesia. So this is an iconic species for Malaysia. It is the biggest flower in the world. But then, are we doing enough? Do we know our Rafflesia? How many species are there? Where can we find Rafflesia? And are we doing good? Are we doing enough to protect and to maintain, to sustain Rafflesia? Perhaps Dr. Samsu will also touch on the in situ aspect of conserving or protecting Rafflesia. But we would like to also hear on our preparation, because looking at the rate of our development, looking at the rate of our expansion, our cities, our towns, our villages, are we prepared to keep to record Rafflesia for future generations? So without further ado, for the next for the next half an hour to 40 minutes, Dr. Shamsul, you have the floor, you have the screen. Let's please welcome Dr. Shamsul. He's if I can introduce quickly, while he's preparing his slide, Dr. Shamsul is my personal go-to person, to among our contemporary. Dr. Shamsul is our reference for plant taxonomy, as a famous botanist now. So he will, based on his experience and vast knowledge on plant conservation, we are very honored to have Dr. Shamsul to hear from him on conservation efforts and management of Rafflesia. In this case, the case study is in Belum State Park, another very iconic location in Peninsular Malaysia that we can learn from. So the floor is yours, Dr. Shamsul.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adri, my good friends, Professor Ray. And good morning to the Botanical as a KP for the JLN. Right, and also all the participants in this session. Okay, Puan Ida, is that ready for the slide? I hope so.
Yes, ready. Ready,
Yes,
Doctor.
we can see the slide, we can hear you clearly. Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, I'm also opening my slide on my laptop. So I'm using this seminar from my handphone, but my slide on the laptop. So sorry because my coverage internet is not good. So as I'm using my personal data from my phone. Okay, very good morning to everybody and also to all the participants for this session. and also to JLN to invite me as one of the speakers for this for today. All right, so and we have about 40 minutes, 30 minutes or 40 minutes. I think for 30 minutes, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
half an hour to 40
30
minutes.
30 minutes. So I'm trying to cover for this topic for this morning within 30 minutes. Okay, so I'm studying on the today I want to talk about the conservation efforts and management of the Rafflesia in Royal Palm State Park. So it is more to in situ conservation. I've noticed that for this session, it's more to ex situ, but misunderstanding, so I put this in situ. Right, but it's okay. I will talk about a little bit on the ex situ and for this for this session. Okay, and this research has been funded by Botanical National. We cooperate with the Perbananan Negeri Royal Bloom, Perak, and our focus only in Royal Bloom State Park, which is located at the northern part of the Peninsula Malaysia and also northern part of the Perak state. Okay, so and all right, so this study have been started from 2017 until 2019, and we have closed this research early 2020. So complete for this research, and actually we provide this research for state park to develop a management plan how to conserve the Rafflesias in Perak and also in Peninsula Malaysia. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, thank you very much, Pandita. And what is a Rafflesia? I think everybody knows about the Rafflesia, and Rafflesia is one of the biggest flowers in the world. And we know that the biggest flowers is in the biggest flower in the world is located in Indonesia. We call it the aroid, Amorpholum titanium. And the Rafflesia is the second largest for the flowering plant. And Rafflesia is actually the life is without leaf, without stem, and without roots. It totally depend on the host. And it is considered as a parasitic plant, which is they absorb all the food from the host. And most of the Rafflesia species are known to be unisexual and dioecious, and they have a male and female. They have male and female flowers, which is separate individual plants, and their attached on the host is only realized by the formation of the reproductive organs, which is the bud and the flowers. So we can see that the photos there. So the bud of the Rafflesia is attached to the host, and the host is actually a lianas. Okay, just a little bit on the history of the Rafflesia. And Rafflesia actually is first discovered by French explorer, Louis Auguste Descamps. Which is he found this species in 1791 to 1794 in Java, Indonesia. But he not described for this species. Okay, and later after 20 years, the British come again to rediscover in 1818. Then that species are named after Sir Stamford Raffles and Dr. Joseph Arnold in Bengkulu, Sumatra. Until now, this species still have, and these species are still iconic to the Indonesia flowers spot in Indonesia. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, next. Okay, the host of Rafflesia, and you know that the lianas is one of the main hosts for the Rafflesia, because this is Rafflesia is considered as a parasitic plant, and they are attached to the lianas. And what is species of the host? That is a tetrastigma, which is the wild grade of the species, and mostly these species are quite common in the peninsula, in Peninsular Malaysia and also Sabah and Sarawak. So they have, and this species, these lianas only recognize only 5 species, mainly for the host to the Rafflesia. This Rafflesia Tetrastigma, Hostii, Tetrastigma crucis, Tetrastigma glabracum, and also Tetrastigma capillotum. So you can look the photos there. So we can see the fruits look like a grape, but it's not edible. It's not edible. Okay, next one. Next slide. And a little bit on the morphology of the Rafflesia. So how to recognize the Rafflesia? The main thing for to recognize of the Rafflesia is to look the paragon look, which look like the petal. That is one of the icon to the Rafflesia, and also the diagram, also the windows. That is one of the main the important thing for the important part of the Rafflesia, which is the paragon lobe is the key to the recognize for the species of the Rafflesia. Okay, how to differentiate between male and female of the Rafflesia. So the gender of the flower can be identified based on the design of the hairs, male or sticky mass for the male on the edge of the disc limb. So you can see the disc and the ramenta, and also the stigma, and also the center of the column. So that organ is to recognize is it the male or female for the Rafflesia, and also the ovary is down there. So the ovary can produce 1,000 of the seeds of the Rafflesia. Okay, next one. The distribution of Rafflesia in Malaysia. So commonly, Rafflesia can be found in the Southeast Asia, including Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and also Philippines. In Malaysia, we can found in 6 states only: Perak, Pahang, Kelantan, Terengganu, Sabah, and Sarawak. And the total of the species is about 11 for the time being. And the most abundant species, the most diverse species in Malaysia, in Peninsular Malaysia, and the most species in Sabah and Sarawak. So if we compare in Sabah, Sarawak to the Peninsular Malaysia, it's shown that Peninsula is most diverse compared to Sabah and Sarawak. And what is the common species in Sarawak? There is a Rafflesia Tuan Muda, Rafflesia Pricey, and also Rafflesia KTE. Only 2 species found in Sabah: Rafflesia Tengku Padini, Rafflesia KTE. Alright, and for the peninsula, we have about 7 species, which is Rafflesia curly, Rafflesia Cantley, Rafflesia Azlani, Rafflesia Sumai, Rafflesia Sharifah Hapsai, Rafflesia Parvi Mukulata, and the last one is Rafflesia Tengku Halimi. And the latest one, probably I and my colleague will publish a new species Rafflesia, which is found in Pahang. So we name it that Rafflesia is Rafflesia Tuanku Azizai, which is our queen for today. So, but still unofficial, but maybe next year we will publish. Okay, next one. Okay, Rafflesia in Royal Globe and Royal Globe State Park. Okay, right. For the first discovered Rafflesia in northern part of Perak in 1908, which is by H.M. Ridley during their expedition in the Greek, and he recognized as a Rafflesia hazelti. But these species are what do you call it? This species was not acknowledged by other researchers until the belum MNS expedition in 1993 in Sungai Halong. So one of the researchers' name is Matthew Wong, named it as number 9. And later, 2004, Professor Latif and Wong published as Rafflesia is a name of the state at that time. So the photo show that there is a Rafflesia azulani. You can see the photo, right? And how to recognize, how to identify the Rafflesia azulani. And basically, this Rafflesia, this is what do you call it? The flowers is the colors of the flowers is very important to recognize, and also the diameters, which is the size of the diameters, and also the pattern of the white spot or called warts. Right. So that is the three characters are using to recognize of the Rafflesia. But mostly the white spot is very important to know the Rafflesia species. So for the Rafflesia azulani, the size is about 38 to 50 centimeter, and the colors is a reddish brown. You can see the white spot are closely grouped. Okay, and the next one is a Rafflesia kinsley. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. Oh, the slide is stop. Panirda, can you scroll the slide, please? Rafflesia kinsley. This is Rafflesia azulani. So again, Rafflesia kinsley. Go down. Scroll down. There is azulani, kinsley, Rafflesia kinsley. And the Rafflesia is look like same like Rafflesia to the Rafflesia azulani, but the difference is the spotted, the white spotted at the paragon that what do you call it? It's called as well space, which is not closely grouped. And the third one is Rafflesia caryi. Panisa, can you scroll the slide, please? Go to the Rafflesia caryi. Next slide, please. Next. All right, that's good. Thank you very much. Okay, Rafflesia caryi. Rafflesia caryi is easy to recognize because there is a totally different compared to Rafflesia azulani and Rafflesia kinsley. So you can see the pattern of the paragon loop is laid down, right? So the size also the bigger. The size also big. The diameter is about 86 to 87 for male and 47 to 50 centimeter for female. And the colors also different from bright red, and the cotton, the white spot very small, and also separated from each other. So this is quite distinct and different compared to the Rafflesia azulani and Rafflesia kinsley. Okay, next one. On the habitats of Rafflesia, so normally Rafflesia can be found in the lowland
Dr. Shamsul, you are muted. Can you unmute yourself?
Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ali, to remind me. Okay, and the altitude is 300 to 1,600 above sea level. And they need the moist and shade environment and commonly at near water source, like a river or any stream. And also the slope is 10 to 40 degree only. So this is based on the literature review and also my observation during our research in the Royal Group. Okay, next. The life cycle of the replica. Okay. For stage 1 until the stage 8, which is stage 1 is considered as an early, as an early bud that rising from the host until the seed germination in the host tissue is take about 48 months, which is nearly it's about almost 2 years, right? Almost 2 years. And for the stage 1 until the stage 5, which is a full blooming, it take about what do you call it? It's almost 3 months to 3 to 5 months. Okay, and for the full bloom itself for the replica is take about 6 to 8 days, and the peak time is day 3, which is you can see the full bloom for the replica. Okay, all right. Next one. Next, okay, the reproduction of replica, and based on the review that the carrion fly is one of the most important for the pollinator for the replica. Okay, and based on the element, next one reported that the replica is more likely to be dispersed by small mammals due to 3 reasons. The size of the food is reasonable to each consumer. The food is sessile and this is very small yet large in the number. Alright, this is our framework during our research. Of course, the funder is come from the TMB, and the objective is to access the selected forest resources for sustainable management in this park. Okay, so the 3 agencies are involved: Perak State Park Corporation, Perhilitan, and UKM. And the researchers most of researchers is from UKM, right? So they have 3 objective, which is salt lick, for the salt lick, find the salt lick, the fish, and also the replica and replicias. And the replica is our I'm taking for the replica to look again for the population replica in the state park, to measure how many species are there, to measure also the current population, what happened to the habitat, what happened to the environmental, right? Okay. And the material of the methods, first we look to the previous study who studied there before, okay, and our student Siti Munira from Prim now, so they have been studied since 2006 for the replica, and also not just in the Perak but also in the Peninsula Malaysia, and then we predict the population status in the replica site. So what we do is we observe, we collect, and we also measure the replicas. And the data collection is now we record the number of the living buds, also the flowers, the soil condition, the plant community is completed, also the weather. So these 3 environmental factors are very important for the replica because it is influent to the replica's life. Okay, and the rehabilitation measure, based on the observation we have discussed to the state park, which is we close that area for the public almost 1 year to look again the condition to look again the population of the population of the rafflesia, because we noticed that before that we noticed that some of the population are gone. Some of the population of rafflesia are considered as there's no flower, there is no population, there is no what they call it, also the lianas and the bud is gone already, because I think that is because of the people come and maybe it's maybe they take out the rafflesia, because based on the local community, the flower buds of the rafflesia can use for the medicines. Okay. This is the result, and based on our observation, we recognize a few seven locations still have a rafflesia, which is Sungai Gadong, Sungai Penarung, Sungai Selatan, Sungai Triang, and Sungai Koi, Sungai Ruak Papan, and X-ray. So for these species are still the rafflesia is still have. And also their population are still quite good and until now, and still to show that there's some of the new species come out, and the new population and the new what they call the Cetasima also are quite still have there. Okay, and this is also our we portrait our the habitat at that area. So for example, for in X-ray population, the condition, so we can see some areas are damaged because of the people, because of the natural disaster, and a lot of the disturbed from others. And also the same thing. So
Syamsul,
yes?
sorry to interrupt, but which slide should we be on? I think it's not moving. We are still
Okay.
on reproduction of rafflesia
I
slide.
see. I thought okay, it's okay. So Nida, can you scroll down? So we are quite fast. And then next, this is framework. All right, this is a method also they have done. Design. Next. Okay, next. This is some decoration of the location and this result. Okay, next one. Okay, that's right. Thank you very much. Okay, this is some result that we try to record during our research, right? So we record some condition, the soil condition is not very good, because we see that the soil is compact, very dry, and also the colors also change, right? And there is no topsoil because of the disturbance by people, and also by environmental factor and so on. Okay, next slide. And we do some research to look again on the community, to look the what they call it, the different study site, and also we look to the similarity on the habitat. Okay, this is the diagram to show that different of the some are mostly are same, some are different between others locations. Okay, next. Okay, as a conclusion or as our final result is what we noticed that most of the rafflesia habitat have loam type of soil, so low organic content or soil humidity, low pH, EC and CEC, low to high concentration of available K, and very high concentration of the magnesium, and low concentration of the phosphorus. Right. So they have a significant difference between all 9 plots there. So of soil is the texture, organic content, humidity, PC, pH, EC, and available phosphorus. So when we, from my opinion, so when we try to bring the rafflesia as an axis to conservation, we need to study the natural habitat first. Then we can know what is the component, what is the main component to to replicate from the natural habitat to the exit to the habitat. That is the good way lah. Okay. What happened to the effect of the rehabilitation? As I mentioned just now, we try to close this area for the public, almost 1 year, almost 1 year. So what we can see that is certain population are grooming and produce a lot of the rafflesia. That means that when we leave it as a natural, we can see a lot of rafflesia can produce. So that means the rafflesia is very sensitive to the people, very sensitive to the environment, the environmental disturbance. So it shows that we need to plan. We need to manage that area is properly to make it the rafflesia are still alive and so on. Okay, next slide. Okay, next slide. This is almost done. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, what's next? The conservation effort. So during our research, we try to get something new. But we try to get the solution to solve this problem, which is a few plans that we have managed, right? So the one of that is we try to design or to propose the boardwalk. A boardwalk is a platform to walk there. So that is the people cannot come too close to the rafflesia plant, to the rafflesia. So it's help to minimize the disturbance. Okay, so you can see the photo. Okay, next. Okay, you can see the photos before and after. So so we managed a new boardwalk for that area. So, and these boardwalk are funded by TMB Research and also TMB International. Okay. All right. So the next slide, please. To limit the numbers of the visitors, so we have discussed to the Perak State Park to limit to manage the people to visit the rafflesia site. So maybe they can make one table to limit for the numbers of visitors to visit for the rafflesia at one time. Okay, the next one, the education, please. All right. So education is very important. We educate the local community and also the native people, which is what tribe there is Jakun and also Semia, I think. Okay. So we educate the people, local community, the Orangsi or the native people, how to manage that area, how to conserve the rafflesia, and how to explain to the people come in to take care about the rafflesia. Right. So the next one. Next slide, please. Okay. And we manage one signboard to that area, which is that for this the information is about on the rafflesia, it's on the life cycle of the rafflesia, and also the what we should do, what we should don't for that area. Okay. Next one for the next one, please. Next slide. Okay. And also we publish a couple of the books, a couple of the journal, the research paper in the journal. Okay. And also we participate in the exhibition to publish or to introduce to the public, to the people. Okay. And also we manage one management plan. Next one. Okay, management plan. For the state park, all right. So what is content there is in term for the visiting time should be controlled or open during blooming. This is our plan, or this is our suggestion to the in the management plan. All right. So training must be training is one of the method to 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 teach for the nature tourist guide and also the staff, also the some of the Royal State Park, and also for the local community. Right. So monitoring is very important. It must be scheduled. So must be regularly to monitor the Malaysia site. And then also we what do you call it? Establish the high conservation of value forest, create as a high conservation value forest. So which is represent is an indicator for the healthy forest, right? And then research and collaboration must be done with the institution and also university, and can cooperate with the NGO also, right? Okay, the next one, this is just a final conclusion. Okay, so we believe that still have plenty of the other population within this park. So we believe that because state park, the area of the state park is too big. So I think I just cover only 20 to 30% only for that area. So we believe that still have the plenty of the Malaysia, and some suggestion to the public that the habitat must be open for the visitation during event only. So which is once the habitat is blooming, that the people can be entered to the habitat. Okay, this is some references that we are used for this research. And the last one is thank you very much for the host, especially for Jabatan Landscape Negara, and also the funder, TNB, and also TNBR Research, our collaborator, Taman Negeri, Pembelajaran Taman Negeri Perak, Pembelajaran Taman Negeri di Raja Belok, and also my clinic from Negara, and also Pembelajaran Information, Pembelajaran Research Center, and for local people, student and my research. Okay, that's it for my slide for the presentation today, Dr. Adri.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shamsul, for the eye-opening lecture or briefing on Rafflesia. I like the key points that you point. I mean the point that you highlighted just now, that to learn to protect and conserve Rafflesia, for example, we need to understand the basics, the characteristics, the habits of Rafflesia. This is based on study in the natural settings, right? So there you go. And then another point that I would like to raise is to do conservation, to do even ex situ conservation and management. We need people like you, Dr. Shamsul. We need more plant taxonomies in this context, as well as other subdisciplines, like animal taxonomies to conserve our fauna, and more ecologists to understand the natural settings of habitats and ecosystems. So we will thank you very much, Dr. Shamsul. So we will keep all the questions and comments from participants right at the end. We will have the Q&A session after the third speaker. But as a moderator, I have the advantage to very quickly ask you one very important question, Dr. Shamsul. Is there any effort already existing or current of having or breeding Rafflesia ex situ?
So far, I never heard for that activities. Yeah.
Okay, but is it possible now that we know that it needs liana, it needs some settings, temperature, or maybe elevation? So is that possible? Do you reckon?
Yeah, I think we can. Yeah, still. I think we can actually, can we replicate the natural habitat to the ex situ? Because the ex situ site is the better, but we need to study more at the ex situ to make it that ex situ areas is totally same like the natural habitat.
Okay. All right, sounds good. So I'm pretty sure there are so many other questions from the participants, but hang in there, Dr. Samsul. So let's enjoy the second and third speeches before we get back to you with more questions. Yeah? So thank you very much again, Dr. Samsul. All right, so from Reflesia, yes, I think Dr. Samsul pointed out a very important point. It is of course prudent to have them to let the Reflesia grows in their natural setting, right? But then, yeah, as we mentioned earlier, as we heard from Puan Hajah also, it is an urging matter also for us to protect these genetic and species diversity in the form of ex situ measures. Yeah. All right. So let's hear from our second speaker. We have with us Dr. Nurdiana Shamsul Rizal. Yeah, I'm amazed actually looking at her CV because she jumped from being a biochemist during her undergraduate. She jumped into plant physiology for her master research and jumped into animal physiology during her PhD. Yeah, but then now she is a coordinator of Health and Wellness Research Nexus at University Technology Mara, and she's a senior lecturer at the Faculty of Applied Sciences, University Technology Mara, ITM. So Dr. Nurdiana will be sharing with us on medicinal herbs, yeah? And what are the potential for us to commercialize it, to use it, to contribute to public health in general. Yeah. So we have with us already Dr. Nurdiana. Apa khabar? Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
All right. So thank you for accepting Jabatan Landscape Negara invitation. So yeah, you have 30 minutes to 40 minutes of screen time to share some of your work, and perhaps we will have a Q&A session right after the third speaker. Yeah. So the floor, the screen is yours, Dr. Nurdiana.
All right. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Adri, as a moderator for today. Thank you, National Landscape Department, for inviting me as one of speaker for today. Puan Hosta Muhammad Daid, Director General, Natural Landscape Department, all viewers and also our audience for today's webinars. For today, I am Nurdiana binti Shamsul Rizal from UITM, University Technology Mara. As mentioned by Dr. Adri before, I'm not a botanist, but more on physiologist. Actually, for my master also in animal physiologist, Dr. Adri, not a plant physiologist, but I'm looking on the medicinal properties. All right. Today I will talk or divert all of you, the attention of all of you, to see the properties from our uniqueness, from our diversity, with the topic exploring the potential of Malaysian medicinal herbs for revitalizing health. So, for today's webinar, I will talk into 4 main agenda. Let's share with you. All right. So, with this work, okay, in this presentation, actually this is the output from several research, okay, that collaborate together with UPM and 2 industries, which is A-Brain Food and also Biofluid. Okay, in this presentation, I will talk on 4 main agenda. The first thing I would like to introduce what is the contemporary issue that may be a bridge to see in the different perspectives, especially from the botanic side, to improve the botanic management plan. And then the second one, I will give some brief knowledge about the research opportunities, maybe between institution and also National Landscape Department. On the third and the fourth part, I will narrow down my presentation only 2 plant that closely to my research area. The first one is Mas Jodet or Bacchus Jetodia. This is actually a miracle asset for us, how this plant can contribute in managing diabetes and also for the polycystic ovarian syndrome. And the last part, I will touch about one of formulation, the unique formulation that we have in UITM, we known as a bioextreme solution. This solution has developed to tackle the issue, especially for combating COVID pandemic. So I will start my presentation with a contemporary issue. Okay, when talking about contemporary issue, I'm so sorry because my presentation more on health. Okay, I really hope everyone here, especially from the botanists, can see on the perspective area how your knowledge can help me a lot to find a new solution, to give a new hope for Malaysian especially. And hopefully, by having that knowledge, we not only have a Malaysian population, but we can give a big impact worldwide. So when talking about Malaysia, Malaysia actually now dealing with several health issue. Okay, not only COVID, but we also have an issue related to the non-communicable disease such as diabetes, obesity, and also cardiovascular disease. When talking about heart disease or coronary heart disease, Malaysia remain as a top country, and this disease actually is the top cause of death in Malaysia. So when talking about, this is for the CVD or coronary vascular disease, cardiovascular disease, okay? And then when talking about diabetes, okay, everyone know, I think everyone know about diabetes, okay? And Malaysian actually are recognized as the top country in Asia with a highest percentage of diabetic patient and also obesity. So we not only obese, but we also have a diabetes issue. So 3.9 million cases of diabetes has been reported in 2019. So based on this issue, okay, obesity, diabetes, and also cardiovascular disease, okay, and then we have another issue, top issue now with COVID. Okay, what the main issue I want to highlight here when you are infected by COVID, okay, the COVID outcome can be worse by the comorbidities such as diabetes, obesity, and hypertension. So means that we have to control both. We have to control the non-communicable disease. Okay, and at the same time, of course, we have to monitor the spreading rate of COVID-19. So basically, okay, on 2017, Malaysia has spent about 57.5 billion just to manage our health system. So this is a bit, this give a big impact to our economy. So this statistic also highlight that important to have a secondary prevention. Means that Malaysian cannot only rely on the primary prevention or primary treatment, but we need to see another or secondary option to control our attitude, our health, lifestyle, and so on. So by having this opportunities, hopefully we can reduce case, the reported case, especially for the non-communicable disease, and of course we can minimize the implication of having COVID. All right, so what is the research opportunities that Natural Landscape Department can see, okay, can involve? Because Malaysia has a unique because flora and other group of species. So based on the using different search engine like Scopus, Web of Science, PubMed, and Google, we can identify that more than 2,000 medicinal plant species have been identified with health promoting activity. So by having that knowledge, so maybe Natural Landscape Department can design what is the best plan, what is the best species to be conserved, and finally we can contribute more on the research, drug delivery, drug discovery research. So this is the biggest opportunity that I can see okay, between National Landscape Department and also Higher Education Institute. So now my presentation start to introduce the first plant, okay, that I have worked with since 2010, okay, actually from 2006. Okay, but for my career as an academician, okay, the first grant I secured for this plant was started on 2010. Okay, this plant can be considered as a miracle asset for us because there has a lot of therapeutic benefit. There are a lot of pharmaceutical benefit that we can have from this plant. So let I show you, okay, what we call, okay, locally we known as mascotet for this plant. Okay, Ficus dicotodia, we locally known as mascotet, right? Why we call it as mascotet? Basically due to the presence of golden dot here. I just point out this one. This is a golden dot. Okay, you can see the golden dot on the upper surface of the lamina. That's the reason locally we known as mascotet. Okay, based on the botanic area, normally we have at least 7 varieties of Ficus in Peninsular Malaysia. Okay, namely the Todia, Bilobata, Usleri, Augustifolia, Tanguinosis, Motlea, and Motlea. So this is a 7 varieties appear in Peninsular Malaysia. So when talking about research related to Ficus dicotodia, okay, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to share about the finding, but I'm just to highlight that when we will talk about medicinal plant, okay, government give a full support to develop or to discover a new drug for us. So when talking about Ficus dicotodia, the chronology of this research started, as I mentioned before, on 2010. We start to search the neuroprotective effect and also anti-diabetic activity. So we start on 2010 until now, and actually in 2023. Okay, after we go for the neuroprotection and also anti-diabetic, we go for the anti-fertility. Not only for at here, we actually focusing the study or the research on the polycystic ovarian syndrome. Actually, we have another grant that also looking on the diabetic infertile rats. Okay, what will happen on the male part. Okay, this not only for women but also for male reproductive system. So, and the third part, okay, the research progress go to the neuroprotection. It means we go in deeper to see the structure of the brain, how it's related with the cognitive performance behavior. Okay, this project actually awarded by MUSTI, okay, Ministry of Science and Technology, and then last 3 years, okay, we are focusing after we have went through a few research, then we can identify what is the weakness from this plant, okay, what is the criteria that we need to improve. Then we come to the nano formulation. Okay, we start to develop nano formulation, and then we treat the animal, just focus on the brain treatment, and by having that treatment, okay, we can improve especially for the diabetic condition. So this is the chronology how Ficus dicotodia or mascotet have been developed. Okay, this is the publication. Okay, again, don't get me wrong, just to emphasize and share with all of you that by exploring our nature, by exploring our medicinal plant, we can increase our visibility internationally. Okay, we can highlight the good point of our plant that we have in Malaysia, okay, to contribute to others. Right, this for the first part, okay, actually we focus more on the pancreas. Okay, how mascotet or Ficus dicotodia can help to improve the structure of the pancreas and finally help to improve or to increase the insulin secretion. Then we go to the memory on brain. This is particularly on brain, okay, how mascotek can improve the structure of the brain. And finally, when you improve the structure of the brain, you can improve your behavior, your learning and memory capabilities, okay, by having this treatment after 8 weeks of treatment. So, and other than that, okay, we also managed to share with everyone that Ficus jetodia also can improve bone formation. In other words, Ficus jetodia can help osteoporotic patient. Okay, basically for the diabetic, they always have a problem with the bone structure. Then Ficus jetodia treatment can help to promote the bone formation. After this, I will show you the structure of the bone, okay, how Ficus jetodia can help, or mascotek can help to improve the structure. So, and only after that you can appreciate, okay, only a small plant, okay, finally can improve our health condition. So this is for the polycystic ovarian syndrome. Okay, so after that we share with all of you here what is a polycystic ovarian syndrome, what is the symptom for the ovarian for the PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome or PCOS. So, and how Ficus jetodia can help to minimize the issue related with the PCOS. So basically, okay, for diabetes mellitus, it affects 34.2 million people in Malaysia. As I mentioned before, we recognized as the top country with the highest rate of diabetes in Asia and one of the highest in the world. So this is the main issue that we have to look seriously, okay? Because when you get diabetes, okay, they will lead to another complication, because when you have diabetes, okay, this is a primary, you have the primary issue or the starting point, okay, to initiate tissue injury and another systemic complication. So that's the reason it's a very serious issue to manage diabetes or to prevent diabetes, because by having this tendency, okay, they will lead to another complication. And then when talking about age for the diabetes, is between 45 to 69 years old. So meaning that this is the productive period, okay, for everyone. So we really hope if we can develop or discover a new drug, we can help this population, okay, this group, okay, and finally they can improve their quality of life. So this is the finding, general overall finding related to Ficus jetodia. Basically, we extract the leaf part of the Ficus jetodia. Okay, from the extract, we give the treatment to the rats. Okay, the first thing, we inject the rat to become diabetic first using the chemical. So after they become diabetic, the animal become diabetic. Then we treat the animal with the extract of Ficus jetodia in this case. And after 8 weeks, okay, we observe. Actually, we observe the progress every week. We observe the changes in the blood glucose every week. And after 8 weeks, okay, we dissect the animal and we harvest all the organ and start to do some investigation related to the several parameters, especially on the structure of the tissue. So basically the idea, okay, from single study, we found that Ficus jetodia can increase the insulin more than 53%. Okay, the reason why Ficus jetodia can increase the insulin secretion, okay, when talking about insulin, okay, let I introduce to all of you, insulin is the important hormone. This is actually a hormone, okay, a responsible hormone to regulate our glucose. So means that after you take your meal, okay, basically we can have some spike of blood glucose, okay, and then that time insulin need to work. Okay, unfortunately for the diabetic patient, okay, sometimes we have the insulin, but insulin cannot work properly. We call it as insulin resistant, or we do not have any insulin, or we have insufficient insulin. So in this case, okay, for treating a diabetic patient, basically we are focused the treatment on insulin. Okay, so after we do the treatment with ficus tetrodia for 8 weeks, we found that this extract managed to increase the insulin for 53%, more than half.
Saya tadi show betul lah. Dia saya nak lah, so saya pergi lah.
So when talking about the tissue injury, as I mentioned before, when you become diabetic, they will start to initiate the tissue injury. So when talking about kidney, this extract can keep kidney injury from getting worse. That we can delay the complication. So maybe after 8 weeks, if you have more than a longer treatment, because our limitation is 8 weeks, we have a longer treatment, we can improve the structure of the kidney. So another new finding that we got from this study, after we treat the diabetic patient with ficus tetrodia, they are able to reduce the brain and also bone injury, and basically bone density increased for 21%. Bone density is a very important criteria to determine or to identify the status, the health status of your the bone. So beside that, when we do the behavioral testing, we do a swimming test, on the rat, we do a swim test, Morris water maze test. So we can see rat treated with ficus tetrodia can perform a greater performance in a behavioral test. So they can, in terms of swimming speed, distance and so on. So this is a indicator, a good indicator how Mastotet can improve our cognitive performance. So allow me to share the structure. I'm sorry if you are not familiar with the structure, but I'm trying my best to deliver the content. Basically this is the pancreas. When talking about pancreas, this is the responsible organ that help us to produce insulin. Insulin is the hormone that need to improve or to control your blood glucose. Basically, this is a normal structure. This is normal structure. This is the responsible area that can increase, that can produce or secrete insulin. This is the alpha islet Langerhans, also beta islet Langerhans. However, when you become a diabetic patient or diabetic subject, what will happen? In this case, we do not have any beta islet of Langerhans. So this is the main reason why we can produce insulin in accurate amount or sufficient amount. So even we treat with a metformin, metformin is a standard drug for the diabetic patient. We can't improve. We can't improve or we can't see any appearance of beta islet Langerhans. So in other words, metformin only can control the blood glucose, but cannot help the body to recover the injury. But when we give with the ficus tetrodia, this is the ficus tetrodia, diabetic rats, we treat with the ficus tetrodia, that's where DFD, diabetic rat treated with ficus tetrodia or treated with Mastotet, we can clearly see the presence of islet of Langerhans. That's the reason, by having this islet of Langerhans, that's the reason we can see the improvement in insulin secretion. So in other words, this herb actually help our body to naturally recover. So we're not to force or to adjust the situation, but we help our body to naturally recover the injury. So by having this pancreas, this is new finding. By having that, this is not pancreas, this is the islet of Langerhans, the responsible area in a pancreas. So we can increase the insulin secretion. So now we move to the second organ. Before that, we talk about the pancreas. Now we move to the second organ, which is brain. I think everyone appreciate our brain. We know that a brain control almost everything in our body. So this is the condition, in normal condition. After 8 weeks, we also can see this is a convolution. Convolution means we have some loop on your brain. Actually, we have research that demonstrate If you have higher number of convolution, means that they closely related to the intelligence level. But in this case, we can see some of the area will disappear because the aging factor, even though you are normal, aging also can affect your cognitive performance. But unfortunately, for the diabetic patient or diabetic subject or diabetic rats here, okay, we can clearly see, okay, the deletion of the area. Okay, we can absent of the convolution. That's the reason when you are diabetic patient, okay, they always associate with a poor cognitive performance or cognitive abnormalities, okay, dementia. Okay, this is another factor that lead to the Alzheimer and so on. So start from just the diabetes because you compromise the glucose uptake for your brain. So when we give the treatment with ficus detoda, this is for metformin, as I told you, this is standard drug that we give for the diabetic patient, still can improve the convolution of the brain. Okay, fortunately, surprisingly, okay, just depends on ficus detoda. Okay, we can see the improvement in the brain structure, even better than the normal rats. So this is the reason when we observe, I didn't bring here the video, okay, because the limitation. We have a video, okay, we observe the performance, behavioral performance of the rat, okay, diabetic rats treated with ficus detoda can even swim better than the normal rats. So means that when we have diabetic condition, that we treat with we take oral consumption of mastocytol for 8 weeks, we can see the improvement, not only behavior but also on the structure. So this is the particular point why we apply for FRGS last year, okay, and we managed to secure to just develop the treatment for brain. Okay, just use a nose to brain, means that we not consume the drug, okay, we not consume the extract, but we inhale. Okay, when we inhale in the nano size, okay, directly to your brain. Okay, no need to involve your stomach and so on, because when you go to the stomach, they start to involve the enzyme and so on. We worry about the acidic condition can destroy the drug. So that's the reason we go for the nose to brain route, and then hopefully still in the study, okay, no data yet, but we can see the opportunities there. All right, so this is the bone, okay, from brain we move to the bone, okay. So this is the structure, the microstructure of the bone. Basically, this is for the normal rats. Okay, after 8 weeks, you can see the structure is like this. But when we scan the diabetic bone, we can see the presence of osteoporosis. Okay, you can see the trabecular also. We can see the abnormalities on the trabecular part. Okay, however, when we give the treatment with metformin and also ficus detoda, the size, the diameter of cortical bone also increase. Okay, and the trabecular only increase for the ficus detoda. So metformin can't increase the trabecular structure, but ficus detoda or mastocytol managed to improve the structure of the bone, the cortical, the diameter, okay, means the density of the bone, and also the trabecular area. So in other words, ficus detoda not only good for your brain and also pancreas, they also give a good or significant effect to our bone, okay, especially for the menopause women, okay, because they will start have this issue due to the imbalance of hormone. So this is the structure. Okay, after we scan and then we start to check histological structure. This is the comparison that we made with between the diabetic rats and also diabetic treated with ficus detoda. Okay, you can see the gap. Okay, the gap in a cortical bone. So this is the main reason why diabetic patient always associate with a fracture injury or fracture incident. So this is the condition where we treat the diabetic rats with the ficus detoda, okay, and we also see the trabecular improve very well. So this is for the bone. Okay, now for that we talk about the diabetic condition. Now I shift your attention or divert your attention to polycystic ovarian syndrome. This is basically for woman case. Okay. In between, before I move or divert your attention to polycystic ovarian syndrome, okay, before 2010, actually on 2009, my team has worked on male reproductive system. When you are when male diabetic rat, when male infected with a diabetic, okay, have a diabetes, so they start to reduce the fertility, start to reduce the number of sperm, or the sperm quality start to drop. So after we give the treatment for 2 months, okay, with ficus getodia, so we can see clearly the improvement in terms of structure, okay, and also the number of sperm. So now we proceed to the polycystic ovarian syndrome. Okay, for the polycystic ovarian syndrome, this is especially for the women. Okay, affect 6 to 8% of women. And the symptom, what the main issue related with PCOS, okay, the main issue we will face difficulty of getting pregnant, irregular menstrual cycle, and also ovarian cyst. This is the issue related. Okay, when we talk about the ficus, when we talk about ficus getodia related to this issue, which is PCOS, okay, this is the normal. Okay, we give day 1 to day 10 for the medications. Then we induce with chemical or letrozole here. Before that, we induce with streptozotocin untuk diabetes, for the diabetes. And then for the induction of PCOS, we will use letrozole. So, and after that, we start to give a treatment. After 30 days of induction, okay, then we start to proceed with treatment. Okay, basically, we daily vagina smear, we can see the cycle, the estrous cycle in a normal, means that from one phase to another phase, they move smoothly for a normal rest. Okay, but when become a PCOS subject or PCOS individual, what will happen? We can see the presence of estrous cycle. Okay, that's the main reason that contribute to the difficulty of pregnancy. It means difficult to get pregnant. So this is the area that absent. We can see the presence of estrous cycle here, and also we also can see the proestrous cycle. This is for PCOS rat. But when we treat the rats, the PCOS rat with mastocytic, with ficus getodia, okay, we have three different doses here. Okay, the highest dose can improve clearly. Okay, the estrous cycle is almost normal for every cycle. So means that after few weeks, after 2 weeks, okay, when treatment with mastocytic, okay, we can see the cycle back to normal. Okay, this is during the induction. That's why we can see any improvement. But after we give the treatment, okay, we can see immediately the improvement for the estrous cycle. Okay, this is the different doses. Okay, this is the lower doses, middle dose. Okay, the lower dose, okay, the middle dose, and also the highest dose. So at the higher dose, which is 1000 mg per kg, okay, we can see immediately the cycle back almost to normal. All right. So, and then we check for the lipid parameter or lipid profile. Okay, you can see here. Okay, this is the condition for the groups treated with mastocytic or ficus getodia. Okay, this is the group treated with standard drug that we have in the bucket. Okay, available drug. Okay, the common drug treat for that a common drug that we give for the PCOS patient, and then this is a PCOS rat. So basically for the cholesterol, okay, when we give ficus getodia, to the rats, okay, we can see the reduction in the total cholesterol. Okay, when we become a PCOS subject, okay, we can see the increment in the cholesterol, total cholesterol. Okay, same goes to the triglyceride, not yet normalized. Okay, but we expect a longer time of treatment can help to improve the triglyceride. Okay, but for the HDL or high density lipoprotein, okay, treatment with Ficus tetrodia or mastocytol managed to normalize this HDL-C. So in other words, okay, a higher dose of mastocytol here, 1000 mg per kg, is good to control the lipid profile of a PCOS rat. Okay, this is for the hormonal profile. Okay, we focus our study on testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, follicle stimulating hormone, and also LH or luteinizing hormone. So what I'm trying to highlight here, okay, that Ficus tetrodia, mastocytol managed to normalize testosterone at a higher level, okay, estrogen, progesterone, and also FSH or follicle stimulating hormone, but not yet for the luteinizing hormone. This is for the highest dose. But I do believe that longer period of treatment will manage to reduce this LH. So this improvement in the hormone balance become a main point why Ficus tetrodia can reduce or minimize the PCOS symptom. So this is the structure. Okay, we go for the structure. This is for the ovary structure. Definitely for the PCOS rat, we can see the presence of a cystic follicle. That's the reason we call it as a polycystic ovarian syndrome. Here is the number. Here is the diagram. Okay, we can see the cystic follicle. Basically, we count the number of follicle is around 8.5. Okay, normally we only have 1.2, but for the polycystic ovarian syndrome subject or rats, we can see the number increase or spike until 8.5. Okay, but when we give the treatment, okay, with Ficus tetrodia, they start to drop. Okay, we can see the improvement. Okay, even though the value not yet good as compared to the standard drug, okay, but we can see the improvement. So
Diana, you have
yes?
another 1 to 2 minutes to summarize the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, I only have another few slides more. Okay, so this is for the uterus morphology. Okay, again, we can see the diameter also improve well for the uterus. Okay, and then this is for the innovation that I'm trying to highlight. So to make sure we can manage to market this product, okay, we start to think about the what is the innovation that we can bring together. So this is the point that I'm going to share with you. This is how we blend mastocytol with the brown rice to improve the digestive system and so on. So this is just the detailed finding related to the product. Okay, so we also run for the acute toxicity test. Okay, the product means the blend between Ficus tetrodia and also the brown rice, okay, managed to improve the digestion and also do not cause any toxic effect to the patient. So this is the another point. This is for virgin coconut oil. Okay, we start from the virgin coconut oil. So this is a special formulation that we work with Biofluid. Okay, I don't want to touch on this one. Okay, this is the service that we give. So this is the product. What I'm going to highlight about virgin coconut oil that we rich with the lauric acid, not only toxic, okay, but the main point is they are able to kill the bacteria, the gram-positive and the gram-negative bacteria, okay, about 99.9%. And the most important thing, the virgin coconut oil, the formulation, the unique formulation, the virgin coconut oil together with lauric acid. Okay, virgin coconut oil already have the lauric acid, but we improve the content, okay, by adding more coconut oil, by adding more lauric acid together with a carrier. And then they are able to manage human coronavirus for more than 99.9%. But this study not yet proceed to the animal testing. So this is just for the preliminary screening. But what I'm trying to say is, try to share with all of you that our virgin coconut oil have a good criteria, good properties to kill or to help us to minimize the spreading of coronavirus. So with that, I thank you again for the Natural Landscape Department for inviting me for this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Nurdiana. This is a very insightful sharing, where obviously, I mean, you've been talking about mas cotek and coconut. So imagine these two species have this much of benefits and roles to humans' health, and of course to animals and our nature surroundings. So there you go. Not just taxonomies, botanists like Dr. Samsul earlier. We also need animal physiologists, plant physiologists, of course, to explore all the potential of the many hundreds, thousands, and millions of species we have. Yeah, so protecting nature, protecting our natural habitats, and of course conserving them in all measures that we could can contribute to the betterment of maintaining public health. So there you go. Thank you very much, Dr. Diana. So please stay relaxed for a while we hear from our third speaker. So we've heard, thank you. We've heard from a botanist, a taxonomist. We've heard from an animal physiologist. So let's now hear from a manager standpoint, from a manager's perspective on managing specific habitats and ecosystems or a species in that, for that matter. Yeah. So when I received the list of speakers from the organizer, I was so excited to see Mr. Dale Arvidsson's name. He's the curator of Brisbane Botanic Gardens at Mount Kuta in Brisbane, where I was in 2006, 2010 while I was doing my PhD in Brisbane in St. Lucia at University of Queensland. I actually climbed Mount Kuta, I think like a dozen of times during the 3 years. So it's so excited to see Dale's representing Brisbane Botanic Gardens with us today. Dale is not only a resource manager, he's a multitasker, I have to say. He used to be working in tourism industry, doing marketing. He's also a very good designer. I mean, he does visual arts and graphic designs as well. So I look forward to see your presentation, Dale, based on your this your reputation. And of course, we want to also hear I remember the awesome view from top of Mount Kuta, looking a scenic view of Brisbane City. You can see Brisbane River from there. You can actually also see right to the mouth of Brisbane River, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, so and how? Please tell us how you manage Brisbane Botanic Garden, Mount Kuta, and also Sherwood Arboretum. Yeah. So it will be a learning process for many of us from your experience. So you have 30 minutes to 40 minutes, Dale. The floor, the screen is yours. Please.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Unfortunately, my marketing and graphic skills have let me down today with needing to have my presentation shared rather than actually being able to share it myself. But from a Botanic Gardens point of view here in Australia, conservation is becoming such a critical factor and has been for the past decade or more. Brisbane Botanic Gardens has been involved with conservation probably since around about 2003, but more strongly since 2010, with our involvement with the Australian Seed Bank Partnership, which Brisbane Botanic Gardens houses one of the many seed banks, as well as the living collections that we house here as well. We have a number of different collections that we'll be talking about today, and I'll be focusing on just two of the current projects that we are partnering with other organisations on. We are not running these purely, but we are partners in these two conservation projects that we'll be talking about today. So without any further ado, was it possible to share the PowerPoint presentation? And I can talk to that.
Can we have the Secretariat to assist with the slides, please?
Yes, Mr. Dale, we are trying to share your slide.
Thank you.
Right.
So today the focus will be talking about two of our conservation projects, which is the Tropical Mountain Plant Science Project and the Macadamia jansenii project. I'll be discovering those in a short while. Could I have the next slide, please? So the Tropical Mountain Plant Science Project is the newest project that we have been involved with just over the past year or two. The project commenced just prior to COVID and has continued through till today. We'll also be looking at a project started just prior to that, which was the Macadamia jansenii project. I'll also be finishing off today talking about then how do we communicate these conservation projects to the people of Brisbane and to our visitors to the Botanic Gardens. Could I have the next slide, please? So to give you a very brief background, Brisbane has three Botanic Gardens. We have the City Botanic Gardens, which is our historic Botanic Garden. Whilst it was declared a Botanic Garden in 1855, it was actually the very first garden and the first site of the settlement of Brisbane by Europeans back in the 1820s. So it's a fairly young city, but it does mean that we have had an unbroken history of a Botanic Garden on that site for coming up to 175 years. Sherwood Arboretum is a small site located on the Brisbane River, and I'll show you a map in just a moment where that will be, and that will actually give you an idea of the spread out of the three Botanic Garden sites. Sherwood Arboretum was developed primarily as a response to the extreme amount of land clearing that was occurring in the 1920s in and around Brisbane. So much of the native vegetation was being harvested very quickly for forestry, without the idea of really understanding what were the species that were being harvested and what was their place in the natural environment. And so this site was established in 1925, which was also when the Greater Brisbane City Council was formed. And today it houses approximately 1,300 Australian native tree species. Brisbane Botanic Gardens, Mount Cootha, is now the heart of the Botanic Gardens world in Brisbane. We opened in 1976, so it's a very young Botanic Garden, just coming up to our 50th birthday in 2026. And it's around about a 56 hectare site, housing around about 5,500 species with approximately 300 to 350,000 plants. So it is by far the largest subtropical botanic garden in Australia. Go to the next slide, please. So well, this will give you a bit of an idea of Brisbane and its spread. Brisbane itself is the capital and most populous city of Queensland, and is also the third most populous city in Australia. So Australia is divided up into a number of different states and territories. Brisbane's metropolitan area has a population of approximately 2.6 million, and it lies at the centre of the Southeast Queensland metropolitan region, which is a fast-growing area of Australia, which currently has a population of around about 3.8 million. For example, Australia has just under 27 million population, and historically that has been based in the southern part of Australia around Sydney and Brisbane. Sydney and Melbourne. So now Brisbane is one of the fastest growing capital cities in Australia. Brisbane is also the largest local government area in Australia. And what is most unique about the structure of capital city botanic gardens within Australia is that Brisbane Botanic Gardens is the only capital city botanic garden in Australia that is not operated by either a state, territory, or federal government. But since 1925, when the City Botanic Gardens operation moved to the brand new Brisbane City Council, we are the only capital city of Australia which is operated with the Botanic Gardens by a city council. Try the next slide, please.
What I do you downplay your job? Oh no.
Now, why really then is a city council run botanic garden involved in conservation, especially of northern Queensland species? So as I mentioned just prior, Brisbane City Council took over the management of what was then called the Brisbane Botanic Gardens, now the City Botanic Gardens, from the Queensland State Government in 1925. There is no official state botanic garden in Queensland, and that's quite a unique thing in Australia, where most of the different states and territories and the departments of environment and heritage are involved with and run their local botanic gardens of their capital cities. So as such, conservation was something that came to our botanic gardens in Brisbane quite late in the piece. What the opening of the 4-hectare Queensland Conservation Collection at Brisbane Botanic Gardens, Mount Cootha, back in 2015, was a very good opportunity for us to house many more ex situ conservation species in a grown area. Being developed in the 1970s, the site of Brisbane Botanic Gardens, Mount Cootha, was extremely heavily planted, as was the style of landscape back then. Meaning that whilst we had lots of opportunity to showcase and grow shade species, many of these sun-loving species we were unable to actually grow here successfully. And with that expansion in 2015, it allowed us a 4-hectare area, a very sunny brand new 4-hectare area for us to be able to display these different plants and to research these different plants as well too. And as mentioned earlier, our involvement has really been since the 2000s, but really since 2010 as part of the Millennium Seed Bank project that Brisbane Botanic Gardens is involved with via the Brisbane Botanic Gardens Seed Bank. Go up the next slide, please. So I'll commence by talking about the special project that we have been more recently involved with, which has the acronym of TROMPS, the Tropical Mountain Plant Science Project. This project is primarily in response to predicted climate change within Australia. For those of you who know Australia, you will understand that it is a large island continent that is by far covered by desert and dry and arid areas, more so than the high rainfall areas. And those high rainfall areas are represented by those darker green sections of the map that you'll see before you. So we have a large section of the southwestern part of Australia that gets slightly higher rainfall than the larger arid zones. Right across the top of Australia, we have monsoonal rains of summer. So we'll see a couple of metres of rain falling during the brief summer rainfall area of what is a long hot summer, followed by an extremely long dry period. So it's very much seasonal or monsoonal rainforest areas. In the northern part of Australia's east coast, focused primarily around Cairns, but extending as far south as Mackay on the central coast, we have what's primarily known as the East Coast rainforest or the wet tropics rainforest. There is concern that these rainforests of the East Coast of Australia are extremely at risk of a drying and warming climate, primarily because the rainfall that comes in from the East Coast falls very strongly on that very narrow bank area and does not extend very far inland due to the Great Dividing Mountain Range. The highest peaks of the Great Dividing Mountain Range are located around Cairns, where you will find that the majority of those areas are located at the highest altitude peaks. Climate niche modelling of several plant species endemic to the wet tropics mountaintops, which are over 1,000 metres in elevation, indicate that the extent of habitat of these species will decline catastrophically by 2080. So why is a warming climate an issue for these rainforests of these high altitude peaks of North Queensland? As the elevation increases, as you would know, the climate becomes cooler due to a decrease in atmospheric pressure. And what you will find is that this adiabatic cooling of air masses that occurs which is the vertical flow of air in the atmosphere. As air expands and cools, it rises and contracts and grows warmer as it descends, means that as those climates warm up on those northern peaks, it means that we have the issue of what are naturally quite cool areas at the tops of these mountain peaks in these very warm tropical environments are starting to be affected by the warming and the drying of these peaks. The change in climate just by moving 100 meters up a mountain is roughly equivalent to moving 80 kilometers towards the South Pole from that location. And why is Brisbane involved? Because Brisbane City is located 1,400 kilometres south of these high altitude peaks found in North Queensland. We have a much cooler winter than those northern peaks do, which is more equivalent to the nighttime temperatures experienced of those higher peaks than in the lowlands of Cairns, Townsville and Mackay. One of the other issues that we have is in the tropics, those montane forests, which usually consist of moist broadleaf forests, sometimes stunted by wind shear on these high altitude peaks, sometimes called cloud forests, gain much of their moisture from clouds and fogs via occult precipitation. So the tropical cloud forests exhibit high sensitivity to climate change simply because those plants, especially during those long, dry winter months, rely very heavily on the cooling cloud formations of the evenings and night times and the early morning fogs that can occur at these mountain peaks, which are located very close to the ocean. With a warming climate, there is concerns that the cloud layer and those morning fogs may not occur in future, and that climate models generally predict reduced cloudiness in the future. Could I have the next slide, please? So the Tropical Mountain Plant Science Project aims to secure the future of these plants with ex situ conservation by having, as we all know, ex situ, these backup populations of at-risk wild populations of these species. Nothing replaces or beats a national park or a protected area where the natural ecosystem houses these threatened species, as they are part of a much wider web of life. However, we do need to look at novel research on seed banking strategies, genetic diversity, and plant tolerance of extreme climates by growing these plants located at these high altitude areas at these southern botanic gardens. So the particular project for the Tropical Mountain Plant Science, or TROMPS project, is a collaboration between the Australian Tropical Herbarium, located in Cairns, the Australian National Botanic Gardens, located in the southern capital city of Australia in Canberra, the Western Larangi traditional owners, the Wet Tropics Management Authority, also based in Cairns, the Royal Botanic Gardens Sydney, the Royal Botanic Gardens Victoria, the Dandenong Ranges Botanic Garden, which houses the largest collection of exotic and native rhododendron species in Australia, Cairns Botanic Gardens, and Brisbane Botanic Gardens. And it's primarily our involvement due to the fact that we are so further south and with a much cooler climate that we are hopeful that many of these high altitude mountain species could potentially survive here in Brisbane. Can I have the next slide, please? So to give you an example of where we are talking about, where I'm talking about when it comes to the wet tropics, this shows you the area of far northern Queensland, which is primarily located on the narrow coastal strip between Cooktown to the north and Townsville, a much larger city to the south. You can see by the colorations of that map what I was talking about before, that those rainforest areas are located on an extremely narrow coastal strip, primarily on the peaks and mountains of the Great Dividing Range. Much of the lowland areas that were covered by lowland rainforest have been cleared for agriculture, farming, and cities. So we do not have much of that lowland rainforest left. And you will see how the easterly winds that blow off the coast onto the mainland, the moisture levels drop out very rapidly. So that by the time that we move further into the Cape York area, that we do not have that year-round rainfall, and that we only have that seasonal monsoonal rainfall on those inland areas. So it's that mixture of high rainfall, and some of these peaks can receive up to 7 to 8 metres of rain during summertime, along with the occult precipitation of cloud and fog formation that keeps these rainforests alive of the wet tropics areas. And during this particular TROMS project, propagules in the form of cuttings and seeds were collected from the summit of 7 peaks in this World Heritage listed area. And we'll look at some of those images now. Next slide, please. This image is of Stuart Warboys, gentleman from the Australian Tropical Herbarium, who's collecting root samples of the lithophytic species Rhododendron viriosum from Hilda Creek, which is located on Thornton Peak. This particular image was taken by Charles Clark when this project commenced back in 2017. And you'll just see the large leaves of that lithophytic rhododendron species located on the rock in front of Stuart. Now, until recently, this plant has been commonly known as Rhododendron lockyiae, but recent investigations has determined that the species lockyiae, given by Ferdinand Mueller, the discoverer, back in the 1800s, is very similar to another variety of species from the same area, but which has a curved trumpet on the flower. So recently, authorities have created a new species name, viriosum, whilst lockyiae has reverted to the original name species. So here he is collecting near the top of the peak, plants or cuttings from this particular plant, which is a lithophytic species. Being lithophytic means it has been challenging to grow this particular species in pop culture at botanic gardens at low altitudes traditionally. And this is again where many of these different species will actually be able to be grown at southern botanic gardens. Next slide, please. This particular image is taken near the top of the summit of Bell Peak. And you can see from the image in the background there, when I was talking before about how close many of these peaks are to the Coral Sea and how they rely very heavily on that on-flow rainfall systems, cloud and fog to keep those rainforests alive. Bell Peak basically descends right down to the coast of the Coral Sea. And this image shows Fanny Ventnor and Darren Crane, again, both from the Australian Tropical Herbarium, collecting the species just mentioned, Rhododendron lockyiae, from near the summit of Bell Peak. Fanny is also holding a piece of Coleus thalasscopicus in his hand, recently changed from Plectranthus to Coleus, which is a species which is also endemic to this particular peak, and another species that was collected as part of this particular project. The budget for these particular projects did not involve helicopters taking people to the summit. So this was the work of these dedicated people who climbed to the summit of many of these peaks, which are all over 1,000 metres from sea level, to actually collect these plant species. And this particular image was taken by Stuart Warboys. Could I have the next slide, please? This particular image is the view from one of our most important collecting sites as part of the Tropical Mountain Plant Science Project. This location has been given the local name of Rhododendron Rocks, which is located on the Carbine Tableland, which is slightly further inland, so one of the westernmost rainforest high altitude areas located in the Cairns area. This site is home to several mountaintop endemics, which have been sampled for ex situ conservation. The species that you'll see visible in the foreground is Leptospermum warunarunarum, the mountain tea tree, which is found on several locations, but only at locations above 700 to 900 metres. We also have collected from this site Zaeria alata, Polysias wilmottii, and the other rhododendron, Rhododendron viriosum. And this image was located or taken by Stuart Warboys this year in 2021. We also believe that the species that you see there with that red new growth, the Leptospermum marunarinum, has a lot of horticultural potential if it can be grown at lower altitudes. And taking plants from ex situ conservation collections out into the wider world of landscape horticulture can be a solution to preventing the decline of these species if the species shows that it can successfully be grown at lower altitudes. Next slide, please. This is an image taken of Thornton Peak and is framed by the endemic species Gymnostoma australiana, which is a relative of Casuarina. The common name of this species is the Daintree pine, as the rainforests located north of Cairns are colloquially termed the Daintree rainforest due to the proximity of the Daintree River. This species, again, only grows at high altitude, in this case here growing near the top of Thornton Peak along a drainage line. And we believe it's a remnant species from a much cooler and wetter time that used to cover most of the east coast of Australia before the continent drifted further north. And this particular image was taken by Ashley Field in 2017. The reason why we are interested in the horticultural potential of some of these species is that Gymnostoma australiana, a threatened species, has successfully transferred into the wider horticultural use in Queensland and New South Wales, which means that this plant I have growing in my own garden at home because it actually has shown that whilst it only occurs in these high rainfall areas, normally above 4 meters of rain every year, right up to quite high altitudes, has shown that it can be successfully grown in ornamental horticulture. If this is the case of this species, there may be other threatened species that do have horticultural potential. Next slide, please. This is an image that may be very familiar to many of you. And this is some of the propagation of the propagules that was taken in the form of cuttings from several of these particular peaks. This particular image was taken by an artist who was involved with this particular project and who documented the project via art and photography, Donna Davis, in 2019. And many of the cuttings that you will see taken here have actually ended up here at Brisbane Botanic Gardens, Mount Cootha this year. The most interesting thing, of course, is that many of these high altitude peaks, due to their proximity and due to their geography, consist of granitic sands rather than rich, deep volcanic soils. So whilst they have extremely high rainfall, the soils are extremely well drained. So you will see there that many of these cuttings have not been grown in regular soils, but have been grown into highly ameliorated and well-drained potting mixes in order to try to replicate the conditions that these seeds or cutting material may be more used to. Next slide, please. So here at Brisbane Botanic Gardens, Mount Cootha, we received our first shipment of plants from the project on the 19th of February this year in 2021. So the plants were grown on at the Australian National Botanic Gardens in Canberra and also at the Royal Victoria Botanic Gardens in Melbourne. And being much cooler places, especially during the winter time, than Brisbane or Cairns, we believe that this was the best locations to be taking these propagules and striking them in a much cooler environment. And there was an extremely high success rate for over 90% of the species of propagules that were collected in these much cooler, almost wintertime locations of these different botanic gardens down south in Canberra and in Melbourne. So after 2 weeks in our nursery shade house, adapting to brighter ultraviolet radiation than the southern climes, the plants were moved to various locations to be sun hardened. We were concerned that there would be quite a challenge for these plants coming from a much cooler summertime location in Melbourne and in Canberra to Brisbane, which is a subtropical climate that receives approximately 1.7 metres of rain every year, but has much higher humidity than those two southern capital cities. We were concerned that fungus and rot may affect some of these particular plants, firstly in their pots and then going into the ground. And this is part of this particular project, but virtually none of those particular species suffered in any way in their short period of adjustment to a much warmer and more humid climate. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the species of the taxa that we received as part of the first stage of the Tropical Mountain Plant Science Project. Obviously, there's a very high representation there of Myrtaceae species. And one of the concerns that we are experiencing in Australia at the moment was the introduction of the exotic fungus myrtle rust, which has been causing many problems and devastating certain species of wild and commercial crops in the Myrtaceae family along the east coast of Australia. So as well as the concerns with will these species survive outside of their natural environment, there was the added pressure of how will these species that may be more susceptible to myrtle rust in the wild adapt not just to the warming climate and different rainfall, the cooler winters and the dry winters they naturally experience, but how will myrtle rust change and affect these particular plants? And this will be an ongoing study as we see how these plants do adapt. Some of these species did arrive with myrtle rust on them, and none of the species though have shown themselves to be particularly problematic yet here in Brisbane. However, this is the first real summertime that they'll be experiencing, and it looks like due to La Nina that this will be a particularly wet and humid summertime on the east coast of Australia. Next slide, please. So to highlight the natural distributions of just two of those particular species, and the maps that we're showing here are of the wet tropics areas of northern Australia. Cryptocarya bellanderiana is endemic to northeast Queensland, and the altitudinal range of this particular species is from 1,000 to 1,500 metres only. So it does not occur at elevations below 1,000 metres. It grows in well-developed mountain rainforest, where it is often stunted by those exposed conditions and high winds that are received in those particular locations. So whilst it has wide distribution, the species, we are very interested in this one because of the wider distribution. We're interested in seeing if it will be successfully grown at both lower altitudes, but also at these different conditions experienced here in Brisbane. The other one there that you'll see there is the mountain tea tree, the Leptospermum marunarum that we mentioned before, which is endemic species to northeast Queensland, and it's known only from the mountains northwest of Mossman in the Mount Spurgeon, Mount Lewis area and the Bellarton Kerr range. Now, the altitudinal range of this particular species is 1,100 to 1,550 metres. So it grows right up to the very highest points of these high altitude peaks in far north Queensland. It always grows in windswept exposed vegetation areas on high exposed ridges in areas which would normally be otherwise clothed in mountain rainforest, but due to those exposed ridges and also due to the fact of having rock quite close to the surface, it exists in these particular areas that would normally be shaded out by more denser rainforest vegetation. It's a very long-lived species in the wild, and it is sometimes cultivated for its small white flowers, but it does need cool and moist conditions to do so. The plant was also used by the early European settlers for colonial medicine, and the leaves and the young shoots of all species are reputed useful for urinary complaints. Next slide, please. So as of September this year, we have installed approximately 60 plants from 9 different taxa in our living collections of the Queensland Conservation Collection, which is this 4-hectare extension area. And these have been planted in the Northern Montane Garden. And this particular collection represents the Northern, Central Queensland and Southern Queensland high altitude peaks area in this particular part of the Queensland Conservation Collection. Next slide, please. So here's some examples of actually planting the particular species on site. We have most of these particular species grown on naturally derived soils from granite or rhyolite. Many of those, of course, are in cloudy areas year-round of high rainfall, up to 8 metres of rain a year. And as at the high altitudes, the plants naturally strip the water from the moist air in that occult precipitation area. The habitats range from cloud forests of simple microfill vine thicket forests right through to exposed rocky outcrops. Whilst our particular problem is that the natural soils in the Queensland Conservation Area have heavy silt and clay-based soils. So we had to improve drainage and soil structure in these particular areas. So a mixture of decomposed granite and fine sands were mixed in with the soils on the site using organic fertilisers, and we also use gypsum in the soils, have been added periodically to balance the pH, but also to make sure that the soils are well drained. Some very heavy bluish clays were removed as well too. Next slide, please. Now, all of the plants have been individually labelled, which the exception of some of our larger collections where we received more than 10 particular plants. And these are just some temporary labels that we use simply because we're not sure if these species will actually survive longer term. However, the labels are quite handy because they include the botanical name, the accession number and the species provenance. Our volunteers and our staff can interpret these particular plants and get some more information about what plant species are looking at, even though the species are quite small. Next slide, please. And here we have an image of our senior gardeners checking on the plant performance and measuring growth of a particular species, in this case here, Zaire alata. This particular species only occurs above 1,000 metres in those montane shrublands and forests in the Mount Lewis area. And this particular species has been particularly challenging for us to grow to date. It hasn't been very happy across the cooler and dry winters that we've experienced here in Brisbane so far, but they are still alive. And we have found that the species and the root systems have been heavily predated by one of our local birds, which we call brush turkeys, who have shown a particular interest in trying to dig up these particular plants when they were planted in the gardens. So we've required that these specimens are root netted to prevent this from actually occurring. Next slide, please.
Dale, you have another 2 minutes to end.
Thank you. Yeah. The other species that I'll mention briefly are the macadamias. You'll see that the macadamias occur widely in the rainforest of Queensland and New South Wales, which is the only place today that the macadamia genus naturally occurs. We have 4 species of macadamia native to Australia: Macadamia integrifolia, Macadamia tetraphylla, Macadamia ternifolia, and the species I'm mentioning today, Macadamia jansenii. Next slide, please. The particular species, the bulburra nut, Macadamia jansenii, is found in only one location west of Miriam Vale in central Queensland, in lowland rainforest, which is classed as critically endangered in the wild. The nut is one of the rarest of the macadamias and only grows in a single valley. We've been working very closely to map and preserve these plants, where there are only 60 plants left in the wild in an area of less than 1 hectare of rainforest. There are 4 insurance populations that have been established outside of this natural area at different botanic gardens. Next slide, please. This particular image shows the natural habitat for the Macadamia jansenii of the complex notifill vine forest. The greatest risks to this natural environment of Queensland is clearing for human population growth and development, fragmentation of those natural populations of rainforest, altered fire regimes, the small population sizes naturally, And of most concern are the weed species such as Lantana camara and Macfadania ungus cacti, the cat's claw creeper, which are major processes affecting these particular species as they can smother out and introduce fire into areas that otherwise are not affected by either weed species or by fire regimes. Next slide, please. The other issue that we have that macadamia species cannot be stored within seed banks. So whilst the highest priority is to preserve the Bulburra nut in its natural habitat, we need to explore storing these species at these botanic gardens here in Brisbane. Next slide, please. And so we are preserving this particular species, which, as well as being threatened, has high ornamental value by having populations located at Brisbane Botanic Gardens, the Gladstone Tondoon Botanic Gardens, Bundaberg Botanic Gardens, and a population has also been established at the National Botanic Gardens in Canberra. Next slide, please. And just to finish off today, it is very important that we spread the conservation message to our visitors and to our residents of Brisbane. Our volunteer guides, which are 140 local volunteers, come into the Botanic Gardens and host guided walking tours, talking about all the very special plants here. And they are the primary way that we educate the public, along with signage, about the importance of our conservation collections at all three of our Botanic Garden sites. Last slide, please. And so with the importance of maintaining threatened species at all of these Botanic Garden sites, it shows that Brisbane is working towards our council's guidelines of clean, green and sustainable, and also helps to add the opportunity to talk more about species that many Brisbane residents and visitors to Brisbane would never have a chance to see in the wild. Next slide, please. So thank you very much to the different people who have contributed to this slide, and also very much for the photographic slides that were provided to myself as well too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dale. It's an eye-opener to many of us, and as you correctly highlighted on the importance of protecting nature, and also to educate communities, local communities and visitors from throughout the world. So this is another key important of why ex situ conservation is very important as well, right? Because what you have in Australia, we might not have them, and what we have might be different to what occurs in other parts of the world. So this is our chance to introduce our species, our diversity to the world. And a quick question to you, Dale: how many staff or maybe the scientific support do you have in your organization to maintain these three gardens, if you may share?
This is one of the greatest challenges that we do face, is that out of a team of approximately 70 staff looking after the three Botanic Gardens, we have just 2 technical staff who undertake the work. This is why having those partnerships with those other Botanic Gardens, which have much larger scientific and research staff, is so critical for us, because we ourselves could not undertake this work.
Exactly. Yep. Very good point there. So something we need to learn as well here, because with limitation of human resource, I think networking in between scientific individuals and organization would surely help enhance or advance our approach in conservation. And as also correctly highlighted by Dale, there are threats on our species and our habitats and ecosystems. Imagine 26 million population in Australia in the big white brown land, and we have almost similar number here in Malaysia, and Malaysia is way much smaller than Australia. So imagine the pressure, imagine the stress facing our species, right? So there you go. Okay, so thanks again, Dale, for the awesome presentation. So now, can I request the secretariat to have 3 of us or 4 of us pin on the screen so we can have a nice view of the speakers. So and while we answer all questions from our participants today. And thanks again. So if I can have Dr. Nudiana and Dr. Shamsul also to turn on your video, and maybe we can respond to some of the questions. I see one up here in the chat box from Mr. Mansoor. To Dr. Samsul. So are there any possibilities or technique to propagate Rafflesia beyond its natural habitat? So I think this is an extension from our earlier discussion. So Dr. Samsul, if you want to respond to that first, while we wait for the rest. Is Dr. Samsul in? It's not here just yet. It's okay. Meanwhile, there he is. Dr. Samsul, if you want to respond to Mr. Mansoor's question. So you did highlighted earlier about there are possibilities if we can emulate the natural settings. But as we learned from Dale just now, of course, the different microclimate condition will have some effect on some species, right? So how about Rafflesia?
We can do, but we need study first.
We cannot hear you, Dr. Sam. Are you muted? No, you're not muted.
Okay, Dr. Abdi, can you hear?
Too soft.
Hello.
Dekat sikit kot.
Okay.
Still too soft.
Okay, Cik Mansur. I answer the question.
Oh, we still cannot hear you. Is it just me or Dr. Diana? Can you hear us, Dr. Samsul?
Yes.
No, I can't hear.
Volume kot, your phone's volume ke?
Okay. Dengar ke? Dr. Adri? Dr. Adri?
No, we still can't hear you. Anyway, okay, tak apa. While you're fixing that, if we can have other question from our participants today, is there any? Okay, otherwise maybe I can direct to Dr. Diana. So besides Mas Chotek and coconut, actually, if you can, delve a little bit into coconut as well, because I have a few friends actually from around the tropics actually also stressing on the multi benefits of coconut. So if you can actually delve or maybe dwell more on coconut or other plants that you are studying and perhaps explain to us some of the key importance of these ornament species or medicinal plants.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Adri. Okay, we're talking about coconut. Okay, my research now are focusing on virgin coconut oil. Okay, the main issue. Okay, the specialty. First thing, the uniqueness about the virgin coconut oil, we have the presence of lauric acid, which is good actually for anti-cancer, which is good only for not only for anti-diabetes and also obesity, but also for anti-cancer. But the main issue now, when talking about lauric acid, when we dissolve the virgin coconut oil or lauric acid in water, okay, that cannot be carried. Means about the drug delivery. Okay, we can't reach the target. The tissue target. So that's the reason we have to develop the carrier. So in this case, when talking about a coconut oil, okay, for if you have a team that working on coconut oil, so my suggestion is we have to work on the carrier, especially on the nano carrier, to carry, especially for the lauric acid, the main element, the uniqueness or the it's a nature for our coconut oil, okay, to carry, and only after that they can benefit all of us. So the main issue is about the drug delivery.
I
So
see.
it's good to have a coconut research.
Yeah, it's very interesting because everywhere around us, like coconut, and then that reminds me also me to eucalyptus in Australia also, like so much benefit from it. I mean, like it can be used as lotion and oil and so many other product as well. So having said that, Dale, I mean, is it within the city council also that you also venture into producing products from maybe medicinal plants that you conserve within the gardens?
Within the garden. Now, basically, we are focusing on master of that of Ficus tetrodia for the development. That's the reason I shared before that we are trying to mix Ficus tetrodia together with brown rice to make sure they align with our natural appetite, means a Malaysian or Asian appetite. So we have a brown rice. Okay, the main issue when talking about Ficus tetrodia, okay, when you take as a decoction, okay, not nothing means the benefit is lower compared when we extract using the solvent system. Okay, after we extract using the methanol, ethanol, then we have a few processes protocol, and then we remove later on. We remove that alcohol. Don't worry, I know that some of us are sensitive about the alcohol. Means this is just to extract out the compound, the valuable compound, and after that we remove it out using equipment, and after that we get the extract that we test free from the alcohol. So then we combine together with brown rice to make sure they can be absorbed. Where we can increase the absorption, intestinal absorption. So means at the intestine area. So this is how we carry actually the extract, and hopefully they will enhance or increase the properties, especially for the therapeutic properties.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Diana. So for Dale, that I mean, like referring to products just now, like you market is there any research going on with some of the species that you've conserved within the gardens?
It's not something that we have explored as yet as far as the usefulness of certain products. There are other botanic gardens in Australia that have been very successful in creating hybrids and different ornamental plants for them to actually use to offset some of their costs with royalties and those sort of funds raised. But for ourselves, even though we are an extremely large state, again, it's probably something that potentially a state or federal funded botanic gardens may be something that would have been occurring here in Queensland. But because we are run by a city council, the city council tends to look towards private enterprise to explore those different options.
Yeah, I like when you pointed out that it's very unique for Brisbane that all of these three gardens are managed by city council. Something that we can actually emulate also in Malaysia, for example. We will learn about Indonesia in the afternoon, but in Malaysia, because we are also a Commonwealth country, but how the country is governed is that land resources are state matters. So normally it is put under state responsibility to protect or to conserve or to manage these resources. But then I like that idea of having go down one level for these resources or to be resources to be conserved or protect or managed by local authorities also. Yeah? So for that, of course, they need like more people, more scientific contributions, more experts, right, to assist. So yeah, I mean, a lot of things to be done, a lot of things to work on. Yeah, but things can be done, yeah, for sure. And of course, we would like to find like a best formula. Of course, no formula fits all for ex situ management, particularly if you have different types of habitats and ecosystems, right? So there you go. Yeah, some few questions have come in. One from Paul Francis to Dr. Samsul. Okay, Dr. Samsul, please say hi or 1, 2, 3 if we want to check, sound check. Can you hear us? Can you say something? All right, so due to human disturbance, in some cases, the population of Rafflesia have dwindled down or almost extinct. And you also mentioned reducing tourists as they want to see Rafflesia in its natural ecosystem. So do you think increasing the price for tourists will decrease human disturbance? So yes, because yeah, you did highlight about the location of our Rafflesia, mainly in protected areas. But then to promote, of course, we know that the negative consequences of mass tourism. So how do we, how best for us to control that? So Paul here is suggesting increasing the price. So what do you think, Dr. Samsul?
Hello, Adri. Hello, Jerry. I already answered in the chat box.
Still cannot hear you. There's something wrong with your volume, your microphone volume, maybe, Dr. Samsul?
Yeah, maybe. But I already answer in the chat box. Can you see? In the chat box.
No, I cannot hear you. Yeah, if you can, yeah. Mm, yeah, if you can press with test speaker and microphone button there near the microphone sign, so we can hear you better. And okay, so maybe there's a question from Nur Izwana to Dr. Nudiana, I assume. May I know, is there any long-term effect study on the rats treated with mascote? So there you go. So we heard from you about I think 8 weeks of monitoring and the impact of mascote to their cholesterol levels and the physiological status. So any longer term effect that could also affect our conditions, Dr. Diana?
Okay, basically my personal study actually limited to 8 weeks, because for the diabetic rats is quite difficult to maintain the subject and over than 10 weeks. Okay, and consider about after 8 weeks, the drug penetration to the cell or the tissue, targeted tissue is arrived. So regarding for the long-term effect, okay, currently there's no study from my side. But for the chronic toxicology, yes, we have. Okay, but it's not for the diabetic. This is only for the normal rats. Okay, but we are talking of for the long-term treatment, means 3 months. Okay, this is for the 3 months, but only for a normal rats, not for the diabetic rats. This is quite impossible to sustain the diabetic rats for more than 2 months.
So 8 weeks for rats, that's equivalent to how long of our humans time frame, lifetime?
Basically, regarding to the age, okay. So you start the animal from 8 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, 8 weeks. Okay, and then we proceed for another 8 weeks of treatment. Basically, when we convert equivalent to human age is around 60 years old.
Oh, okay. All right, interesting.
Years old. So that's why when we check
16
the tissue
or
structure,
60?
60.
Zero, okay.
Okay. So that's why we can see in the picture, as I shared before, we can see the present or the appearance of osteoporosis, aging effects, okay, on the brain and also on the bone. So that's the main reason we can observe that thing.
Correct. So do you have like a network of maybe medicinal plant scientists that you've already established? Or
Okay, for UITM, and yes, we have our brain work on this the compound, the active compound. So I also tested one compound, the signature compound for mascote, which is Vitexin. Okay, yes, Vitexin for the dose 1 mg per kg. okay, show a better result compared to the mastodet. Okay, but this is only to reduce the blood glucose, but not to another part. So means that for the treatment to boost the natural physiological condition, so we need a synergistic effect from several compounds. So we can't rely on single compound.
Okay. Yeah, why I asked just now is to understand maybe there are also studies on other medicinal plants besides mascote and
Oh,
coconut.
okay.
Yeah.
Yes, we have we have Azadirata or Sentang. Okay, we have a Centilla aesthetica. We have Pegaga. Okay, Pegaga also we already developed nano emulsion formulation. So and for another part we also have Keladi tikus. Okay, we have this is for anti-cancer. This is basically the main plant that we focus in UIKM currently.
I read recently about ulam raja on how it's
Yeah.
so good to I mean
It's
like
also from UKM, right?
yeah, I heard, I saw yeah, I saw the article yeah, about how it's important to fix memory loss issue. So that's my favorite veggie actually, but then I tend to forget a lot of things lately though. Perhaps it's not effective just yet for myself. So Dr. Samsul, can we hear from you now, or?
I already answered in the chat box. Can you check in the chat box, please?
Yeah, still. Anyway, okay, it's okay, Samsul. So may I redirect that question to Dale, please? How do you manage visitors to Brisbane City Gardens? How much do you charge, if you can share, and how effective is charging to protect your surrounding? If you can also share, maybe outside your jurisdiction, but also in national parks or maybe state parks, and how they manage control in number of visitors.
In Brisbane, at the different Botanic Gardens here in Brisbane, this is a free service provided by Brisbane City Council, so there are no entry fees. The only fees that we have are around certain events or certain workshops and specific activity. I'm not aware of any public botanic garden in Australia that charges entry fees. However, some gardens do charge for car parking fees at some of those sites, which is an income stream, or they basically will charge for a certain event to attend, which can be quite large events as well too. In Queensland, attending national parks is again free of charge. However, many other states in Australia, you have to buy a parks pass in order to have either a day or week or month or even a year use, which helps goes to offset the costs. So it does seem like in Queensland, the focus is very much on free to the general public. And I do understand that for us, that's particularly strong and effective when getting across the conservation message, because it means as wider a selection of people can visit the gardens and can learn about those different conservation messages, either via signage or via a guided tour experience. However, I do understand that elsewhere in the world, many botanic gardens and sites, which maybe don't receive funding from state or federal governments, do have to charge in order to offset their operational costs.
Correct. Yeah, it's very important to run the conservation and to protect issues. Some issues that we have here in Malaysia, maybe not that prominent in Australia. It's like a waste management, for example. Like of course, that needs a lot of resources, funding to cater for. But yeah, we are impressed. Like in Australia, yeah, nature is basically free, right? We breathe oxygen for free, so it's good that there's no charge for us to enjoy nature. I mean parks and surroundings. But then yeah, the trick would be in managing issues such as I've mentioned waste, and maybe also utilities and amenities like toilets and whatnot, right? So yeah, that would be a challenge, and we surely need to learn. So meaning this I mean come to conclude that it's not the charging, right? It could be the attitude of visitors. Yeah, it could be the behavior of visitors on managing their own ways. So for example, and then there are always messages saying that leave nothing, yeah, enjoy the surroundings and leave nothing except our footprints. So we heard that a lot, but still issues like litters are still there, right? So yeah, there you go, Malaysian. We need to learn to enjoy our nature, our natural surroundings. We have to manage or control our behavior also. Yeah. So and then of course it is based on Brisbane's experience. It is funded or fully supported by the local authorities in funding, right? So, but then of course we need a lot of capital to do that as well. So that will be a challenge that we can also emulate in Malaysia. Yeah? And then there's another question to Dr. Diana again. Do you think in the near future is there an opportunity that ficus I think this is referring to Mas Jotek, to be cultivated in commercial scale in Malaysia? And if so, do you see any negative impacts on land use change? Yeah, just like palm oil palm cultivation.
Okay, thank you, Paul, for the question. I think Paul Francis for the question. So when talking about the opportunities, I think what can I see? We have a great opportunity to cultivate Ficus tetrodia in Malaysia because we can see the commercial value of this plant. Okay, but we need to identify how the product can be marketed. Since most of the available mastotate here, Ficus tetrodia product now, just focusing on decoction use, based on the decoction use. So I think that's the most issue, right? When talking about cultivation, yes, there's a great opportunity to cultivate Ficus tetrodia in Malaysia. Talking about the impact on that, I don't think have a negative impact because we naturally we can farm the presence of mastotate in the oil palm plantation. So means we can have both. We have oil palm and we also have mastotate naturally there. So I can't see the negative impact on this view. That's my comment. From the botanist view, I don't know, but from a physiologist view, I think this is a good opportunity or the great time for us to think about to cultivate this plant.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think Paul's concern is on changing land use for the purpose of just planting one species. So I think you answered it quite nicely there. So maybe we can have a blended system of planting shrubs in between palms and perhaps we can strategize that way. Yeah? So thank you very much, Dr. Diana. So I think we've learned, I think that would be the last question so far. In case there's any, you can just raise your hands. But I think, the key outcome that we've learned from this first session, the morning session of this forum today, would be some of the benefits of the importance of protecting our species. Now we know that some of these key species are endemic or maybe native to some areas within our countries, within the region, within any country in the globe, and also many of them have very direct or clear contribution towards human health, and of course other ecosystem services that they provide collectively. Yeah? So one species alone may have that much of benefits, but collectively by protecting them, we know we will learn a lot of their roles and benefits. And of course, as a habitat and ecosystem, they will provide other ecosystem services as well. And we also learned today an experience from Australia on how not just protecting an area, not just protecting species and transplanting or trying to cultivate species, but it is also important that we educate local communities, we educate people on the importance of these species, on importance of protecting our species and our genetic diversity. But also, this is to encourage people, our communities to contribute. I like the way, of course, in Australia they don't charge, but the participation of communities as volunteers, that's very important also, things that we can learn. And we see a lot, the emerging large numbers of local and environmental NGOs here in Malaysia. So yeah, if you can contribute by participating in their activities, in their mission to assist the authorities in protecting and carrying out conservation and management of resources, protection of resources. So there you go. Thank you very much to all three speakers for your time and for your contribution. And just to alert everyone that this is the end of the first session of today's webinar. We will so big hand to all three speakers for the morning session. Thank you very much. And I would like to just request everyone to stay on. We will have a 2 hours break for lunch in between 12 p.m. to 2 p.m. Malaysia time. So it is already past lunchtime for you, Dale. I apologize. I hope you had a big breakfast earlier. And we will convene again at 2 o'clock, 2 o'clock Malaysia time, using the same link and platform. So on behalf of the organizers, or maybe Encik Mansoor, I see you there. Do you want to have like maybe a concluding remark from the department, or you want to extend your gratitude to the speakers?
Thank you, Dr. Adri. Good afternoon to all speakers, and on behalf of National Landscape Department, I would like to extend our gratitude to all speakers for your presentation, for your input. What you have presented today is very useful, very informative to guide us at the National Landscape Department, and also to guide several botanic garden in Malaysia to strengthen our strategies and to strengthen our management, to ensure that botanic garden that we are planning and botanic garden which are in operation now in what we call it in line with national aspiration. And the most important thing is to ensure that conservation of plant species in botanic garden become a priority based on the input that all speakers shares just now. So again, on behalf of our National Landscape Department, we thanks to all speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much again, Mr. Mansoor. All right, so with that, this is the end of the first session. Thank you very much again to all speakers. We will be listening to 3 more speakers in the afternoon. We will have Mr. Jain Linton from Sabah Agriculture Park. This is a famous spot for tenom, kopi tenom and teh tenom, if I'm not mistaken. So correct me if I'm wrong later, Mr. Jain. And we also have Bapak Iskandar Sirega, Professor Dr. Iskandar Sirega from Bogor Botanic Gardens. So we will learn a little bit from Indonesia's experience. And finally, we have Mr. Landscape Architect Francis Uling Majoy from BL Consultant Team later to share with us on his and his team's experience in managing and introducing some parks and gardens and measures to protect some of the species ex situ. So there you go. Thank you very much again, ladies and gentlemen, and all participants for staying up until this lunchtime. So we will have 2 hours break, and I will see you at 2 p.m. Thank you very much again for all. Thank you.